UA 517, do you want to report a UFO? Over.
Negative. We don't want to report.
Look, it wasn't my worst Wednesday night.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Anomaly-NOW, straight out of Austin, Texas. I'm your host, Miles Lewis. This is the weekly, sometimes live news and media roundup for the 501c3 nonprofit Anomaly Archives, aka the Scientific Anomaly Institute. Thank you for joining us. This is going to be a special edition where we're going to be focusing on the recent UAP UFO hearings in Congress. This occurred just a couple of days ago on Tuesday, September 9th, 2025. Today is the anniversary of 9/11, September 11th, 2001. It is September 11th, 2025. And boy, what a world we live in. We've got about 17 clips to get through. But before I get to that, I want you to consider what's discussed in this UAP hearing with regards to the recent reportage by our good friend Greg Bishop about the ARROW, All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office's recent workshop in Vienna, Virginia, that was back last month, August 5th through 6th, wherein they invited the most scientifically oriented civilian UFO research organizations to participate, and in a workshop whereby they were trying to share information on best practices for data collection and that sort of thing. And this is really, to my mind, unprecedented and a very important event. I would encourage you to go over to the Society for UAP Studies.org website, where you can read senior correspondent Greg Bishop's reportage on this ARROW and AUI Engage Academia in UAP Symposium. This is a very interesting and important event, and Greg has written a very helpful overview of that there with lots of quotes from participants and attendees. And it was, interestingly enough, it was organized by a librarian whom we reported on some of her studies into data collections related to UFOs, UAP, some months back. I'm forgetting her name, but it's in this article here. But yes, I encourage you to check that out and keep that in mind, as you will hear a lot of criticism, some of it I think rightly deserved, of ARROW, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which I believe was created in 2022. So it's only been around for 3 years. And while it's certainly not above criticism, I would say be a little more patient and tempered in your analysis of whether or not it should continue to exist, which does seem to be part of, I think, a move afoot by some of these representatives that are part of this quote unquote UAP caucus there on Capitol Hill. All right. Well, moving right along. So what we're going to be talking about is this. Oops, sorry about that. Let's get that back up here. What we're going to be talking about is this UAP hearing that occurred in Congress, Washington, D.C., and which you can read about. We've got lots of web pages over at anomalyarchives.org. This page for the hearing itself has all the links to the archived recording of the proceedings, as well as there's our nice photograph from that video of our 5 witnesses that we'll talk about here. But it's got links to the official oversight pages, and as well as information on the witnesses, including links to their prepared statements, which you will also be hearing the recordings of here in just a second. But yes, these different witnesses are Jeffrey Nusatelli, former U.S. Air Force veteran and security officer, currently serving Chief Alexandro Wiggins, UAP witness, who's been affiliated with a fairly famous recent UFO piece of footage, George Knapp, the UAP UFO journalist, Dylan Borland, who until this hearing, I think almost no one knew anything about, UAP witness, UFO witness, U.S. Air Force veteran, and Joe Spielberger, who was the quote-unquote minority witness, who basically was there on behalf of POGO, the POGO I forget exactly what that acronym stands for, but basically it's all about whistleblowing and protections of whistleblowers, which is the main focus of this event. So anyway, links there also to past recent UAP hearings from the UAP hearing in Understanding UAP earlier this year that was very different than the rest, and the two that happened last year, one of which was more sensational than the other. And yeah, we've got links to all of these different witnesses. Sorry, I did it again. I closed the window. So we've got links to Jeffrey Nicitelli, who is known for his Vandenberg UFO sighting, except he's not actually, you'll hear him describe the event, but he wasn't a direct witness to the object, this giant football field size red rectangle, red square, but it's known as the Vandenberg Air Force Base UFO of either 2003 or 2004. I've heard different accounts. We've got his witness testimony for this embedded in his page there. We've also got links to the Vandenberg event. There is a really good overview of the case at about the 22-minute mark of this UFOs Investigating the Unknown, put out by National Geographic and available through Hulu. But this whole episode is available on YouTube for free. You can watch it there. But interestingly enough, this guy, Chaz King, former Air Force security forces, is a direct, I think, witness to the Vandenberg incident, but is not actually part of these proceedings. And then we also have pages, as I say, for Alexandro Wiggins, the currently serving officer, and you can see more about his encounters and testimony over there at our website. And then also we have pages for, of course, George Knapp, not a military veteran, but a veteran UFO journalist who many people love dearly, and I think he does a great job, and you'll see that. But it's his written statement, his prepared statement is very long. He did not get all the way through it in the recording, and you'll see that momentarily. And also, as mentioned, Dylan Borland, not much known about this individual. However, he worked for almost 3 years for the Air Force as a geospatial intelligence analyst, almost 4 years for BAE Systems, the aerospace company, and also as an intelligence analyst, and almost 6 years for Intrepid Solutions and Services, LLC. There's a screenshot of his LinkedIn service record and his embedded whistleblower statement for the House of Representatives Task Force. So settle in. Oh, wait, is there one more? Yes, of course, the other witness that we're not going to really focus on so much. He did a fine job, but he's the non-UFO guy, but he's there in representing POGO. What is their Partnership for Public Service? No, that's who he was interviewed by. But yeah, I believe he may have been on one of the other UAP hearings as well. But Joe Spielberger, you'll definitely want on your own to watch his testimony, but we're going to focus on the other testimony here in just a moment. All right, so I've got about 17 clips. Let's jump right in. We're not going to play everything from the event. It's all available online. We'll probably be posting these clips separately on our YouTube channel. Of course, you can find all the information in the show notes on our website, anomalyarchives.org, for this episode and past episodes. So here we go. Yeah, we're going to start with Representative Luna, who is the chairperson, with her opening statements. And yeah, anyway, here we go.
Good morning and welcome to the hearing regarding UAP disclosures. For too long, the issue of unidentified anomalous phenomena, commonly known as UAPs, has been shrouded in secrecy, stigma, and in some cases, outright dismissal. Today, I want to state clearly that this is not science fiction or creating speculation. This is about national security, government accountability, and the American people's right to the truth. I have spoken now to a number of whistleblowers from the military, to include the infamous Eglin Air Force Base incident that occurred when myself and former Representative Matt Gaetz, as well as Representative Burchett, followed up on a lead from multiple active duty Air Force pilot whistleblowers that alleged that the United States Air Force was covering up UAP activity at Eglin Air Force Base. We have heard from a number of whistleblowers, specifically military pilots, that the reason for not coming forward publicly is out of fear that speaking out would cost them their flight status and potentially their careers. This is unacceptable. We cannot protect our airspaces if our best trained observers are silenced. We cannot advance science if we refuse to ask questions. And we cannot maintain trust in government if we keep the American people in the dark. Now, Congress has tried to fix this problem. Congress tried to create formal channels through the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, also known as AARO, and the Intelligence Community Inspector General for service members and officials to make disclosures. But the reality, the reports come in are often to brush aside, slow-walked, or met with skepticism rather than serious investigation. Recently, the former AARO director, known as Sean Kilpatrick, attacked our witnesses and members on this committee. It should be noted that he's a documented liar and brings into question what his purpose at AARO really was if it was not to follow up on investigations and disclose his findings to members of Congress. A former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Chris Mellon, described a report published by AARO that found no evidence that any USG investigation, academic-sponsored research, or official review panel has confirmed any sighting of UAP-represented extraterrestrial technology. As the most error-ridden and unsatisfactory government report I can recall reading during after decades of government service. Mellon further noted that this was a first error report submitted to Congress without the Director of National Intelligence's sign-off and seemingly excluded input from any scholars or experts who have studied or written extensively about this topic, as would normally be in any other case in this field. Mellon determined that this report failed to fulfill the congressional mandate under which it was required, omitted entire agencies with known investigations or activities related to UAPs, and omitted any discussion of efforts to hide classified or unclassified information about UAP. Such efforts were unaddressed by the report, despite the existence of agency records and investigations concurring with them, including those at U.S. Customs and Border Protection. If we set up offices and oversight bodies only to let them become graveyards for testimony or, worse yet, ruses for pretending to investigate when in actuality there was no follow-up, then we are not doing our jobs. In recent months, Congress has also been presented with evidence that points to technologies that, to our knowledge, are beyond our current capabilities. It is our duty as elected representatives to follow the facts wherever they lead and to ensure that those facts are not buried under classification stamps or bureaucratic excuses. Let me be clear, whether UAPs represent adversarial technology, natural phenomena, or something beyond current human understanding, Congress has a responsibility to investigate. If these objects are foreign in origin, then they pose a direct threat to our national security. And if they represent something unknown, they demand rigorous scientific inquiry, not ridicule, not secrecy, and not silence. The stakes are very high. Adversarial nations are not waiting for us to catch up. They are studying these phenomena as well aggressively, as multiple nations have also announced their own parliamentary investigations into this very topic. If we are to continue to hide information from ourselves, we risk strategic surprise. If we continue to ignore our pilots and service members, as well as countless government whistleblowers, we risk losing their trust. And if we continue to shield the truth from the public, we risk eroding the very foundation of democratic accountability. This is why this hearing matters. This is not about fueling speculation. This is about demanding the basic transparency from the Department of Defense and the intelligence community and other military contractors. It is about asking the questions every American has the right to ask. What do we know? What don't we know? And why in a free society are we being told so little? A major barrier to this committee's inquiry into UAPs has been the lack of cooperation and transparency from the Department of Defense and the intelligence community. In preparation for previous UAP hearings, the committee repeatedly asked the Department of Defense to allow members to view videos and files related to UAP incidences. Unfortunately, the Department of Defense notified the committee staff that due to the department's Special Access Program rules, only members of the House Armed Services Committee, as well as the Defense Subcommittee on House Appropriations, also known as HAC-D, were allowed to be read in onto such programs. For a non-committee member to be allowed to view these documents and videos, individual members must be approved by the chairman and ranking member of both HASC and HAC-D. Independent SAP oversight has presented a consistent problem for Congress, as well as program budgets are classified. Additionally, oversight reporting to Congress is classified and only provided to the authorizing and appropriations committees of jurisdiction. The American people are not fragile. They do not need to be shielded like children from reality. What they cannot tolerate and what they will not forgive is a government that withholds the truth and punishes those who dare to speak up. I want to close with this. Future generations will look back at this moment and ask what we did when presented with the unknown. Did we look away, embarrassed or afraid, or did we pursue the truth with courage? I intend to be on the side of truth, transparency, and accountability, and I hope my colleagues on this task force will be able to do the same. To quote a few elected officials, Senator Schumer has stated, multiple credible sources allege a constitutional crisis over UFOs. Senator Rounds has stated that these are brilliant individuals and they are not making this stuff up. And our current Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has stated very high clearances and high positions within our government in regards to these whistleblowers. Senator McConnell also described these whistleblowers as sane and credible. And the witnesses today are not alone. In fact, they're far from it. In fact, 34 senior military, government, and intelligence officials have broken their silence. This includes now Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Senator Rounds, Senator Gillibrand, General Jim Clapper, the former director of the government's UAP task force, the former head of aviation security for the White House National Security Council, the former Secretary of Defense, and many more. Again, to quote Secretary of State Rubio in an upcoming documentary known as The Age of Disclosure, even presidents have been operating on a need-to-know basis that begins to spin out of control. And to quote Senator Gillibrand, who also went public in this documentary, it's not acceptable to have secret parts of this government that no one ever sees. It's time for the fundamental truths of UAP to be revealed to our nation's leaders and the public. It's time for the U.S. government to exercise transparency. And with that, I yield to Ranking Member Crockett for the opening statement.
So I think that was a pretty good opening statement on the chairwoman's part. Again, setting aside these different representatives, right, left, Republican, Democrat, setting aside their political views, whatever you might think of them, just focusing on this issue and trying to keep laser focus on that. I think that was a very good intro. I did find it interesting. Am I the only person? I don't think so. I've talked to some folks last night who heard the same thing I did, that it sounded like she said Sean Kilpatrick as opposed to Kirkpatrick in reference to the former head of AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. But yes, some serious charges against him in that opening statement. I also appreciated that she included Chris Mellon's very rational critique of the very flawed AARO historical report. And interestingly enough, notice that she's alluding to this still yet to be released documentary, Age of Disclosure, which is supposed to be so well done and have so many people of high-ranking government and military and spookdom intelligence community ties as to be unprecedented. And yet it has not yet found a distributor. And as we reported on previous shows, there appears to be some connection in its funding to billionaire Peter Thiel, for better or worse. But I certainly want to see the documentary. It premiered here in Austin at the South by Southwest Film Festival this year, and I think everybody in this community is anxiously awaiting viewing it. All right, coming up is a clip from the opening statements of Representative Crockett. I believe she's a Democrat from here in Texas.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. At a time of increasing distrust in government, it is important for Congress to take action to restore the government's credibility. Bringing transparency to an issue of great public interest is a step toward doing just that. So I thank Chairwoman Luna for calling this bipartisan hearing to discuss unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAP, which is today's term for what was commonly known as UFOs, unidentified flying objects. And while some people think of flying saucers when they hear these terms, it is vital that we focus on the real-world impact of UAPs on critical infrastructure, civilian safety, and national security. There is good reason to believe that most UAPs have origins far closer to home. Currently, NASA has not found any evidence that any UAPs have an extraterrestrial origin. Our adversaries are working to develop new capabilities to gain military advantages, and those efforts are likely explanation for the mysteries that we have observed. Nevertheless, the federal government has a responsibility to the American people to investigate and provide transparent disclosures about every incident. The federal government is equally obligated to protect those who report what they've seen, especially to commanding officers and supervisors. And Congress should do everything in its power to protect whistleblowers and conduct oversight of agencies that are failing to provide that protection. Democracy depends on transparency, and transparency often relies on the courage of individuals willing to risk their careers, reputations, and in some cases, their personal safety to tell the truth. So I look forward to hearing from the witnesses today. We should welcome their accounts and acknowledge the bravery they have shown to come before us. We must ensure that all whistleblowers feel that they can come to Congress to tell their stories without fear of retaliation or professional consequences. We need transparency not just to make better policy, but also to ensure that information flows between all those who need it. There are too many tragic examples in our history where information lapses and a lack of cross-agency coordination led to disaster. Just this year, failure to communicate between FAA and the Department of Defense led to tragedy over the Potomac. The Biden-Harris administration sought to eliminate some of these lapses when it established the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office at the Department of Defense. AARO can convene sources from all branches of military, the FAA, and NASA to combine forces to create a comprehensive picture of what is happening in our skies. Some UAP reports have perfectly normal explanations: satellites, consumer drones, weather balloons, even pranks. But we need to track down each and every single UAP. United States has millions of eyes in the sky, both electronic and human. But only the combination of civilian, commercial, and military sources can begin to create a complete picture. So we need to ensure that people can come forward and report what they have seen to the relevant authorities. And they have to have the right to do so without fear of retaliation. This country has a history of dedicated public servants standing up for what is right, even in the face of potential consequences. From the Pentagon Papers to Watergate to torture programs, whistleblowers have not only informed the public, but also empowered Congress to fulfill its constitutional duty of oversight. Past Congresses have written laws to grant legal protection for whistleblowers, and it is up to us to work responsibly with all sources to hold the executive branch accountable. We are here today to listen to the stories of those who have witnessed events of interest to the American people, and to support the policies that cultivate an environment that welcomes and protects whistleblowers. I hope this hearing will be an example of the respect and protection whistleblowers deserve and the importance of conducting oversight of the federal government. I yield back.
So, yeah, very calm, collected, rational, not very UAP specific, UFO specific, but that's a lot of the members, I think, who are participating have little or no knowledge of the subject, which is to the detriment of these proceedings. But I think that's a perfectly good, rational introduction again. And let's just move on to the wonder of seeing our witnesses sworn in.
At the Project of Government Oversight. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witnesses will please stand and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth so help God? Let the record show that the witnesses answered an affirmative. Thank you. You may take your seat.
And now we're just going to proceed with each of the witnesses' opening statements. Again, you can read these, and they were basically reading from their prepared statements. You can read these on our website or on the official oversight website in PDF form. So here is Jeffrey Nusatelli talking about his Vandenberg Air Force witness experience and subsequent experience at his home, I believe.
Opening statement.
Morning. Thank you, Chairwoman Luna, Ranking Member Crockett, and members of the task force for giving us the opportunity to testify today. My name is Jeffrey Nusatelli. I'm a former military police officer with 16 years of active duty service in the U.S. Air Force. I'm here today because the American people have both the right and the responsibility to know the truth about unidentified aerial phenomenon. That truth remains hidden, classified and silenced by fear, retaliation, stigma, and confusion. Today, we are here to help break that silence. Between 2003 and 2005, 5 UAP incidents occurred at Vandenberg Air Force Base, home to the National Missile Defense Project, top national security priority. At the time, we were conducting launches deemed by the National Reconnaissance Office as the most important in 25 years. These were historic launches. These facilities were vital, and they were repeatedly visited by UAP. Each incident was witnessed by multiple personnel, documented, investigated, and reported up the chain of command. We sent information up, but we got no guidance down on how to handle these events. I personally witnessed one of these events and investigated others as they occurred. 6 other service members have provided me with the information that I will share with you today. The incursions began on October 14, 2003, when Boeing contractors reported a massive glowing red square silently hovering over 2 missile defense sites. After several minutes, it drifted further east onto the base and vanished over the hills. This event, now known as the Vandenberg Red Square, was referenced by Representative Luna at the first hearing on this topic. Official Air Force records of this event are in possession by Aero and the FBI. Later that night, while I was on duty, security guards at a critical launch site reported a bright, fast-moving object over the ocean. I responded to the incident. Chaos ensued over the radio as the object approached rapidly. I heard my friends screaming, "It's coming right at us, it's coming right for us, and now it's right here." Moments later, I heard them say that it had shot off and was gone. When I arrived on scene, I talked to 5 shaken witnesses who described a massive, triangular craft, larger than a football field, that hovered silently for about 45 seconds over their entry control point before shooting away at impossible speed. About a week later, another patrol reported a light over the ocean, behaving erratically. Believing it might be an unannounced aircraft, they declared an emergency, and an armed response force responded. Before the forces could arrive, the object descended and either landed or hovered on our flight line, and then took off again at impossible speed. The witnesses to this event were threatened and intimidated afterward. They were told to keep quiet and think about what they were reporting. After that, things did get quiet until about 2005, when another patrol reported a massive triangular craft larger than a C-130 silently floating over the installation. He watched it for a few minutes. It traveled west and disappeared into the night. Own encounter, again in 2005. I was off duty, sitting in my backyard with 2 other police officers, when we noticed what first appeared to be a satellite in orbit. It wasn't acting like a satellite. The light was strange, it was pulsing, and then it started to maneuver. Dropped in elevation. At times it would vanish from view and reappear in a different location in the sky, and eventually it reappeared 200 feet over my house. It was a 30-foot diameter sphere of light. My friends and I watched it for a moment, and then it gently accelerated and traveled up and disappeared into the stars. These events profoundly changed my life and the lives of my friends. We stand at a pivotal moment in history. The question is no longer whether these events are real, but whether we have the courage to face them. True leadership requires vision, a willingness to confront the unknown with transparency and resolve. So I ask the Congress to help we the people enact this vision. There are 3 goals. Fund independent research and treat UAP study with the same seriousness as we would any other scientific field. 2, end secrecy and overclassification. Transparency is the foundation of truth. Without it, witnesses like us are dismissed. 3, protect the witnesses. Many stay silent out of fear for their careers, reputations, and the safety of their families. Protect them, and you will embolden others to join this cause. These phenomena challenge our deepest assumptions about reality, consciousness, and our place in the universe. Exploring them can unlock transformative breakthroughs in technology, biology, and human understanding. Let this be the moment when America chooses courage over fear, transparency over secrecy, and progress over stagnation. Let's show the world that our nation leads not only through strength, but through fearless pursuit of the truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nusatelli.
So, as mentioned, and he starts by saying 2003. So there was a series of sightings over a span of years. There's also historic sightings that happened well before that at that location, Vandenberg. But yes, he was a witness to the events that unfolded at that air base as a security officer on base. Whereas I think this person who is not part of this hearing, Chaz King, that's featured in the National Geographic UFO investigation docuseries, I believe saw it firsthand, like either through a window or outside viewing it. But it's also interesting and confusing. Of course, it's described as the red square incident, but it's really more of a red rectangle as described generally. But I think just red square is easier to say, conjures weird thoughts, connections to Soviet Russia, red square. But interesting, not least of which because there are so many sightings of these large glowing mystery objects at that location, but also is confusing. I am not so familiar with this case and these multiple sightings to know if he's incorrectly saying triangle. In this testimony, he does say the red square UFO, but he also does repeatedly describe some of the other sightings as being of red triangles. Is he just accidentally saying triangle instead of rectangle? I suppose that's an easy mistake to make. But I do commend Jeff Nusatelli for having kept these important records that help verify this event. I've heard some others say, and I don't know where this was in the testimony, maybe it's later and we may or may not get to it, but it's said that he may have lost some of the sworn statements of other witnesses. You know, that's not good, but these things can happen, or maybe they were stolen. Who knows? But suffice to say, this is a very interesting series of sightings and encounters that certainly should be further investigated. And apparently in that National Geographic documentary series, towards the conclusion of that segment on that sighting or series of sightings, it says the Arrow is in possession of this information and that their investigation is still ongoing. So maybe we'll hear more. We shall see. But then again, this personal encounter that occurred at his home with other witnesses of a glowing orb of approximately 30 feet in diameter coming down from quote unquote satellite height down to 200 feet above his home. That is also very interesting. Who knows? All right. Well, let's keep moving. Next up is Alexandro Wiggins and talking about his sighting, I think, as a Navy officer. We'll see. Here we go.
Please press your button. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairwoman Luna, Ranking Member Crockett, and members of the task force and the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Alexandro Wiggins. I'm an active duty U.S. Navy Operations Specialist, Senior Chief Petty Officer, father of 3, and dedicated American testifying today in my personal capacity. The views I share are my own, and I do not represent the official positions of the Department of the Navy or any subordinate organization. On the evening of February 15th, 2023, at approximately 19:15 PST, in the Whiskey 291 warning area off the coast of Southern California, I was serving on board USS Jackson. During that period, I moved between the Interior Communications Center, ICC-1, and the bridge wing, correlating the sensor picture with visual observations, part of my routine responsibilities for surface and air picture management. What I observed and what our crew recorded was not consistent with conventional aircraft or drones as they appear on our system. A self-luminous, tic-tac shaped object emerged from the ocean before linking up with 3 other similar objects. The 4 then disappeared simultaneously with a high synchronized, near instantaneous acceleration. I observed no sonic boom and no conventional propulsion signatures. No exhaust plume, no control surface articulation, on the Sapphire image system. Shortly after the synchronized departure, radar tracks dropped. These observations were multi-sensor and recorded inside of ICC-1 with time location overlay visible in our source frames that have been made public by journalists. From my experience operating in this region over many years and consistent with our public characterized encounters, unidentified objects reoccur in United States operation areas off Southern California. That fact alone does not tell us what they are, but it does argue the systematic stigma-free reporting and for the preservation of sensor data so analysts can evaluate safe and intelligence implications with rigor. I want to underscore 3 points for the task force and the committee. Aviation and maritime safety. When crews and watchstanders observe objects that maneuver or accelerate in ways that does not match known profiles and do so near our ships and aircraft, that is first and foremost a safety issue. Standardized checklist and training should ensure we capture the best possible sensor data in real time, including IR settings, slant range estimates, and bearing and range altitude snapshots, and immediate chain of custody for any recordings. Reporting without stigma, protection without retribution. Sailors need to know that reporting UAP encounters will not harm their careers. Congress can help by reinforcing witness protection and by directing the relevant office to maintain confidential, destigmatized channels for service members who step forward with data. Declassification and transparency where possible. The task force declassification mission is directly relevant here, where operational security permits releasing metadata preserved sensor excerpts or at least technical summaries would improve public trust and accelerate outside scientific scrutiny. That includes, when feasible, the time georeference IR frames and radar parameters needed for independent analysis. To be clear, I am not here to make claims beyond my lane. Provide a first-hand account of what I saw, what our systems recorded, and why it matters for safety, for intelligence, and public confidence. My request to you is practical. Help us capture, protect, fairly evaluate the evidence, and provide a safe pathway for those in uniform to report it. In closing, I want to thank the committee and the task force for holding this hearing and for placing this discussion in a forum where evidence can be examined carefully and openly. I appreciate your attention and stand ready to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
So I am not that familiar with his UFO footage. I think I've seen clips of it, but just briefly. But I think it comes up shortly in this next clip, but we're not going to actually show that. But anyway, yeah, no, I think Chief Wiggins clearly very nervous, but I'm so glad that he has come forward. He has been validated by former Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, who I believe during his recent Archives of the Impossible lecture at the conference this year at Rice University made reference to another witness on a such and such ship, I think the USS Jackson or something like that, or Omaha or whatever. And it may have been in reference to Chief Wiggins, but there has apparently been interviews where Tim Gallaudet has confirmed Wiggins' story and background, I suppose. All right, well, moving along. This next one's about 7 minutes, and he doesn't even barely get started, and that is, of course, UFO journalist George Knapp.
I now recognize Mr. Knapp for his opening statement.
Good morning, Chairwoman Luna, Ranking Member, Ms. Crockett, and members of the task force. And Dina Titus, I just knew we were going to get you involved in this topic at one point. Great to see you here. I'm George Knapp, Chief Investigative Reporter at KLES TV in Las Vegas. I began my pursuit of this weird mystery way back in 1987, and for 38 years, I've always approached this as a news story. It's not a matter of faith or belief. To me, it's a story, and it's an important one. I'm proud to be here alongside these witnesses today, men who have seen strange things and stepped forward to tell the world about it. Whistleblowers and witnesses who step up are routinely insulted, belittled, or worse. They risk their reputations, their careers, their clearances, their livelihoods, and sometimes much worse than that, even their freedom. I know that one of the goals of the task force here is to figure out ways to protect whistleblowers and witnesses. And it's a tall order because so many of the things that happen to witnesses like these are extra legal. They're carried out by persons unknown, as Mr. Dave Grush, sitting up at the top of the room, knows all too well, including events in recent days that have happened to him. I want to share a couple of things that I've learned along the way in this long journey, and I submitted most of that in written form because I estimate that my statement here today would take about 4.5 hours. So I'm going to try to jump over and touch on the more important salient points. I submitted a detailed written statement for the record, and we'll go into a lot of that here. But the public has been told over and over since the late 40s, there's nothing to worry about here. These mysterious craft seen by millions of people in the skies, in the oceans, over the land are not real. They're not a threat. The witnesses are wrong. They're crackpots. Don't believe it. That changed for me. What got me hooked is the paper trail. Documents that were squeezed out of the U.S. government after the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, became the law of the land. And those documents paint a much different picture than what the public, the press, and Congress have been told over many years. The documents from military and intelligence personnel behind closed doors admit that, quote, these things are real. They're not fictitious. They can fly in formation. They're evasive, and they outperform any aircraft known to exist, including ours. The public, of course, as I said, has been told something much different. Back in 1989, I reported about a guy named Bob Lazar, who claimed that he worked at a facility dubbed S4 out in the Nevada desert, very near to Area 51. He said he was part of a reverse engineering program. He said there are alien craft that would be taken apart to figure out how they operated out there. And that was a pretty tall order. I had clearly taken a dive into the deep end of the pool there. But in the years since then, I've interviewed dozens of other people, and I've detailed what their testimony has been in the written statement. They include Senator Harry Reid, Senator Howard Cannon, also of Nevada, a guy named Al O'Donnell, who was the first general manager of EG&G in Nevada, which managed the Nevada test site, which blew up hundreds of nuclear weapons. There's a guy named Dr. James Lukatsky, who was a career scientist with the Defense Intelligence Agency, who was the guy who initiated a program called OSAP, Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program, which is, as far as we know, the largest acknowledged UFO program ever funded by the U.S. government, which put together an amazing pile of information that members of this committee and the world, most of which have never seen. The DIA still hasn't released 95% of what was prepared by that program at a cost of millions and millions of dollars. The one name I do want to bring up in this session, though, is Robert Bigelow. So looking into the idea of crash retrievals and reverse engineering, while OSAP, that program, was active, the DIA's contractor, Robert Bigelow of Las Vegas, made a bold attempt to acquire physical proof of UFO crashes. It's been widely reported and suspected that Lockheed Martin is one of the contractors, the defense contractors, that has held this stuff, stored it away in secrecy, and tried to figure out how it works. I have confirmed on the record that Robert Bigelow and a trusted colleague from OSAP met with and negotiated with senior executives at Lockheed Martin and hammered out a deal wherein Bigelow's company, Bass, would receive a quantity of unusual material that had been stashed away and protected at a facility in California. That material was not made here. I want to move on now to the Russia files, because that was going to be sort of the central impetus of what I was going to talk to you about today. Back in the early 90s, I got into Russia, met with a number of their defense officials, Ministry of Defense and others, who confirmed for me that Russia had been doing the same thing the United States had been doing, that is, secretly studying UFOs while publicly saying something completely different. The documents and interviews that I obtained and have now shared with this task force show that the USSR launched what is almost certainly the largest UFO UAP investigation in the world. The first phase of that was an order was sent out to the entire USSR military empire that every unit, you see anything strange in the sky, a craft, an orb, something unusual, you had to gather all the evidence, collect testimony from the witnesses, look for physical evidence, and all of that information went into one program at the Ministry of Defense. Thousands and thousands of these reports came in. A lot of them were first routed to the KGB, but then back to another program that came after this collection effort called Thread 3. And Thread 3 was an analysis program. We have provided to the committee the documents of what they were trying to do, and essentially they were trying to build their own UFOs. They were using the information from their observations and studies to try to figure out that technology. The guy who was in charge of that program, Colonel Boris Sokolov, told me that their goal was to basically develop technology that would be superior to anything we had based on what they learned from UFOs.
Mr. Knapp, just in the name of time, from my understanding, did you have anything you wanted to submit for Congress to see in this committee?
I have submitted those documents. There's
To play any videos? Do you have a video that you would like to play?
I don't think it's for me to play. Yeah, Alexander's video.
Okay.
You could play it. He could narrate it.
Okay. We can, in the name of showing that video to everyone on task force, we'd like to play that video at this time.
So again, I cut that short. They cut it short. Of course, Knapp already went over by at least 2 minutes of his 5-minute allotted opening time. I think he's excellent speaker. That's why he's a TV journalist. And I think he has been privy to a lot of information. I think it's my understanding, I think that he sat on his knowledge of the then secret OSAP program up until the time it was made public, because of, I think, his friendship with Harry Reid, who initiated the whole program, and Bob Bigelow, who administered it. And, you know, that, of course, that's one of the most important takeaways from the comments that were made there in George Knapp's opening statements was, first of all, he gets James Lukatsky mentioned in the record importantly at this stage. We'll come back to that later. And of course, the OSAP program, the biggest known UFO government investigation program ever, which he describes as most of the data still not being available to the public or Congress. And the importance of Bigelow to that project. It was his baby. He was awarded the contract, for better or worse. But he also brings up Bigelow in the context of this apparently confirmed, but yet to be really followed through on, attempt by Bigelow and Bass to transfer this alleged UFO or crash material in the possession of Lockheed Martin to Bass as part of that OSAP program. And then, of course, they talk a lot about this Thread 3 Russian program, which, again, I was aware that he had gone to the Soviet Union and gotten this information, but I never really heard that much about it. And as I think he's saying, well, he'll say later, this also is not yet publicly available, but that it's been in the hands of these research folks funded with our tax dollars. But I would also just note in the audience, in previous clips, we have seen documentarian James Fox and the audience. We saw Jaime Mason peeking out from behind Alexandra Wiggins. There's a lot of other people whose faces I recognize, but I can't think of who they are. But behind George Knapp, of course, is his partner in crime, Jeremy Corbell, the documentarian, and who's been releasing so much of this footage, including, I think, that video of Alexandra Wiggins that they were about to play. They did play more of it, but again, I cut it short. They cut it short as well because they didn't seem to be able to get the audio to shut off so that Alexandra could narrate it. And I don't know that it personally strikes me as that dramatic of footage to begin with, but I do think his testimony to the nature of what they were witnessing, perceiving, and recording is important in terms of a good documented potential possible UFO UAP sighting. But also in the audience, I think, was UFO GERB or JERB, however you say it, in the audience behind them. But all right, well, we're going to move right along now to our next clip, which is the opening statement from the least known witness. Again, I think most people had never heard of this individual, Dylan Borland. And I'll just say straight out the gate, he is nervous AF. Dude is extremely scared, visibly sweating. And you'll see from his demeanor in this and other clips that he's squirrely, and I don't mean any offense by saying that. And I do not doubt him as a witness, but I think he's very concerned, which is why we haven't ever heard of him. And as you hear his story, you'll understand why, perhaps. So here we go.
Opening statements.
Good morning, members of the task force and the committee. I would like to express my gratitude for being invited to testify to the current task force created under the People's Chamber and the American public. As an American citizen, veteran, and intelligence community professional, it is an honor and a privilege to serve under oath before you on behalf of our country. I speak for myself and no former agency or company I have been previously affiliated with. My name is Dylan Borland, a former 1N1 geospatial intelligence specialist for the United States Air Force in an active duty enlisted capacity from 2010 to 2013. I've also been employed with BAE Systems and Intrepid Solutions as a senior analyst, expert in analyzing video, radar, and advanced electro-optical imagery for official identification of aerial order of battle as well as naval and ground order of battle. I'm a federal whistleblower, having testified to both the ICIG and ARROW with direct firsthand knowledge of and experience with craft and technologies that are not ours and are reportedly operating without congressional oversight. Because of my direct knowledge of the reality of certain legacy UAP programs, my professional career was deliberately obstructed, and I have endured sustained reprisals from government agencies for over a decade. From 2011 to 2013, I was stationed at Langley Air Force Base, Virginia, conducting 24-hour operations via manned and unmanned aerial vehicles for Special Operations Forces in the global war on terror. During the summer of 2012, my team was on standby for weather, and I returned to my barracks on base, and at approximately 0130, I saw an approximately 100-foot equilateral triangle take off from near the NASA hangar on the base. Craft interfered with my telephone, did not have any sound, and the material it was made of appeared fluid or dynamic. I was under this triangular craft for a few minutes, and then it rapidly ascended to commercial jet level in seconds, displaying zero kinetic disturbance, sound, or wind displacement. Some years after that experience, I was further exposed to classified information from the UAP legacy crash retrieval program through a sensitive position I held within a special access program. During this time, intelligence officers approached me in fear for their own careers, citing misconduct within these programs and similar retaliation that I was already enduring at this time. These issues include medical malpractice committed by Veterans Affairs staff, denial of work I performed while enlisted in the United States Air Force, forged and manipulated employment documents, workplace harassment including colleagues being directed to not speak with me, manipulation of my security clearance by certain agencies, blocking, delaying, and ultimately removing my ability to be employed within the IC. The retaliation I face and the retaliation against individuals I know who worked in these programs is what convinced me in March 2023 to become a whistleblower. I came forward out of concern for people's lives and to ensure I did everything I could to let our elected representatives know the truth about what is really happening in the executive branch. At the end of March 2023, I agreed to meet with ARROW following the suggestion of other federal officials believing it was what our nation required of me. I had reservations with ARROW due to assessments they were reporting publicly at the time as a misrepresentation of the truth. Because of these concerns, I did not share sources and methods information in order to protect current and former federal personnel who had firsthand exposure to technologies of unknown origin. I did not want anyone to face further retaliation beyond what they had already endured. And unfortunately, a staff member ended up getting in some trouble because of that. After David Grush testified under oath in the summer of 2023 and provided historic disclosure, I was then asked to go to the ICIG and did so in August 2023. It was very clear early on during my intake interview, which was video recorded under oath, that the objective was to solely assess how much I know and not move forward with an investigation with new information I provided them. The aftermath of that IG complaint still troubles me to this day. Since my ICIG complaint, I've been prevented from resuming prior employment and can confirm I'm still blacklisted from certain agencies within the intelligence community. In addition, multiple agencies attempted phishing attacks to assess what I had divulged to the Inspector General, including being asked to disclose details of my ICIG complaint during a CI polygraph for a position unrelated to UFO UAP matters as recently as November 2024. As I sit before you today, I and many other whistleblowers have no job prospects, no foreseeable professional future, and a nation every single one of us came forward to defend. Numerous individuals have come forward in various ways to reveal the truth of the UAP reality as patriots and defenders of our nation. Yet many feel discarded, isolated, hopeless, separated from the country they serve. Efforts to rectify this situation for all whistleblowers have been difficult and troubling. And to my fellow whistleblowers and officials who know this information, I offer you my apology, something that I have never gotten, and I'm giving it to you. I swore an oath to the Constitution of the United States, an oath that demands truth and transparency for our democratic republic to function. Each day, these truths remain hidden from our citizens. Humanity drifts further from the principles our nation was founded to uphold. Each day, victims of crimes committed by agencies and companies maintaining this secrecy are denied justice is another day our Constitution is shredded. In 2023, Patriots provided this committee and the executive branch with undeniable proof of the UAP reality, and I commend your continued commitment. The future of humanity is one which we either travel to the stars or regress to the Stone Age with this technology. My career has been to deliver critical information to decision makers. Your role as elected by your representatives is to act on it. Time to act is now. Thank you.
Mr. Borland, thank you for your service to our country, and we appreciate you. And we are sorry about how you've been treated, and we will make sure that we try to rectify that situation.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Spiel.
I found his intro statements profoundly moving. I think I really feel for him, and I hope that we learn more about his travails, his experience, and hopefully his witness testimony. Something he didn't quite, a refrain that came up over and over again that we've certainly heard in past hearings is, I can't tell you that except in a skiff, maybe. And he doubles, triples, quadruples down on that over and over throughout his testimony at this hearing in other clips. And we're not going to see every clip. We're not going to, this is a nearly 3-hour event. And I'm just trying to pull out some key stuff. But again, it's a 2 hours, 50 minutes. You can go and watch online elsewhere. We may post the whole video ourselves on our channel, but I really feel for him. And, maybe he's a liar. I doubt it. It sounds genuine to me. All right. Well, let's see. So I am going to skip over Spielberger's introductory statements. Again, I think he does a good job. He's not a UFO guy. He's there as somebody who's in government on behalf of whistleblowers to, promote and defend government transparency, oversight, and whistleblower protections. And I think that is the main gist of this whole hearing. And I don't mean to do him short shrift by not showing the clip, but there's just so much to get through. I'll just say, next we had this brief 5-minute interjection from Chairwoman Luna asking Dylan Borland, that you just saw speak, for some confirmation on size of what he saw.
Okay. All right. Mr. Borland, in your testimony, you described witnessing large triangular craft while stationed at Langley Air Force Base in 2012. Can you explain what you observed in terms of size, behavior, and why you're confident it was not conventional technology?
Great question, ma'am. So on the base, I lived in the barracks. There was a little smoke pit outside. I was there on the telephone and looking across to the flight line, and I see a white light pop up and stop about 100 feet in the air. I thought it was a weather balloon. I've seen tests from there before, weeknight, normal thing, not surprising. I actually finished my cigarette and I began walking up towards the flight line. There is a track, and because I was on 3 months of night work, I would walk the track at night when we were weather down. And as I began walking towards the flight line and the track, the light then flies across the base, across the flight line, and as it flies to me, a triangle manifests around the light. I can't tell you if it was active camouflage. I can't tell you if it appeared around the light, but I can tell you that it was a white light and then it was a triangle. It stopped about 100 feet in front of me and approximately 100 feet above me. My telephone got extremely hot, completely froze, dead. I remember how thick it was. It was between 1 to 2 stories thick, equilateral triangle. I could never see the top of it, and the edges were 90 degrees. There were 4 lights in total, 1 light on each corner, and a larger light in the center, 2 to 3 times the size of the corner lights. But what was really odd was the outside. The best way to describe it is like looking at a James Webb telescope picture where you have the colors and then the black background. So the craft itself was this black metallic flake paint, but on top of the craft was this gold lava, plasma, some type of fluid going over and around the craft. I'm under this for about 2 to 3 minutes, and then the center light flashes 2 to 3 times, no sound, immediately shoots up to commercial jet level minimum, in my opinion. And I immediately feel static electricity all over my body. And then I smell the smell of after a thunderstorm or lightning storm, that really strong summer thunderstorm smell. Gets up to flight level. I'm trying to get my phone reset, and I can only see the center light at this point. If I didn't actually see it take off, I would have thought it was a star. And then it hovers up there and it begins to slowly move due east out over the Atlantic Ocean. I finally got my phone reset. The entire thing was about, from the time I saw the light pop up near the hangar until it took off out over the ocean, was about 15 minutes.
In following up to that question, after you disclose this information to the Intelligence Community Inspector General, you're subject to phishing attempts and job blacklisting. How widespread do you think this is across the intelligence community for those who raise concerns regarding UAP programs?
It's a difficult question to answer. I think prior to David Grush and people beginning this process of bringing people into awareness of the reality of these programs and certain things people have witnessed, probably extremely widespread. I think today there's still an issue, but because people are able to come before you and people are speaking out, I think it has been somewhat less. I would hope, though, that people would, because if this goes back into closed doors, this is going to get really ugly.
What type of behavior have you witnessed from former Aero director Sean Kilpatrick as well as his staff in relate to this information you provided to them? Did they ever try to classify this information as non-human technology?
Good question. The problem with this is that I know what I experienced firsthand. I know other things. I think the staff at Aero that I had met with in March of 2023, I think they were good people doing the job they were told to do. I did not meet with Kirkpatrick. He was either not present or did not want to meet me that day. However, they did classify information about the reality of this subject. And it was very concerning because in my Aero MFR, they had actually referenced a former staff member that was the one who told me to go there, and they probably shouldn't have done that.
And real quick before my time is up, and we might go to second round of questioning just so you're all aware, how important, given everything that you've seen and experienced, is the UAP Disclosure Act of 2025 in restoring both public accountability and trust?
I think very important. I would hope, though, that the 7-year window could be shrunk, my opinion, but very important. The truth needs to be known.
Thank you very much. I now recognize Jared Moskowitz of Florida.
So, yes, more detail on his very interesting sightings or sighting. And it reminds me, and I think others, of some famous UFO triangle footage of the quote-unquote TR-3B and other famous triangle sightings. But this particular video that's presumed to be a hoax, I think, where in the center white light pulses and then like expands and the craft seemingly disappears or shoots out of frame. But very, very fascinating. The fact that he saw this seemingly, I think he says, taking off from a NASA hangar. Very interesting. And he specifically mentions the possibility that this was some kind of active camo, some kind of Predator-esque mimetic camouflage, and also this description of this kind of golden lava plasma around the object. Fascinating. So the next Representative Moskowitz, I'm not going to play his clip. It was about 7.5 minutes of questioning, but he gives some interesting introductory comments about the issue of narrative and story change on the part of the powers that be. That theme will come up later in another representative's questions and comments. And then after him was Representative Mace. She asks Borland about witnesses and whether he thought what he saw could have been human made. She mentions having been in a skiff with Arrow representatives. She, of course, talks about the fact that things can be debunked. And she asks, I think, all the witnesses, are you scared for your safety? Which I think actually is a good clip, but I'm not going to play that. And she asked, I think, Dylan Borland, if he's been subject to the same kind of leaked stories as David Grush has been subjected to. And he, I think, says not to his knowledge, but he's aware of those with regard to Grush, and it's very concerning. They talk about, what about the issue of black budgets hiding these SAPs, these special access programs that he apparently, Borland, says he was a party to. And this idea that there's some staffer within Congress or the committee who, they get back to what he says about the staffer who is the one that recommended he speak to Arrow, having felt some repercussions in a way that is inappropriate, apparently. The last thing she asks George Knapp something, and I was going to go ahead and play this. It's a brief clip here.
It hasn't been a thing. I only have 1 minute left. So, Mr. Knapp, we are definitely going to watch every documentary. You guys have you and Jeremy have done a terrific job. I usually have more questions than I have answers. I think we all do. And you guys are doing a terrific job to bring information to the public. Do you think that any of this is a psyop by the U.S. government?
Entirely possible. I mean, our government and other governments have admitted that they've tried to use UFOs to cover secret projects. But I think they also do some reverse engineering of those claims. So years after people start seeing UFOs over Area 51, for example, they come up with the story, oh yeah, that was, we planted that story. So I read in a major newspaper just a couple of weeks ago, they planted this story. An Air Force colonel went out into the desert, went to a bar at Rachel and gave them some fake UFO photos. And that's how the whole story about Area 51 started, which is preposterous.
Yeah. I didn't even get to the crash retrieval program stuff yet, Miss Chairwoman. There's just so much. Okay. Thank you so much for your time today. I wish we had more time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So after that, Representative Crockett, again, Texan Democrat, she asks some further questions. She talks about the overclassification issue. She specifically mentions this in reference to the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and the issue of COINTELPRO operations and torture programs and the importance of whistleblowers in all of those types of cases. And then she asks Spielberger for an example of how national security is used as a pretext for overclassification, to which he rightly suggests. So he's like, well, the 9/11 Commission found that was part of what led to that tragedy, was this overclassification situation. And so this hearing happening just 2 days before today, September 11th, the 24th anniversary of those terrible events in 2001. And then the mentioning of Age of Disclosure documentary earlier by opening statements from Representative Chairwoman Luna. That documentary, from the clips I've seen, also is kind of harping on this idea of an impending potential 9/11 event due to overclassification related to UFO UAP issues. Make of that what you will. All right, this next clip is just part of. It's about half of Representative Burchett of Tennessee's questioning. Of course, Burchett is just quite the comedian. Let's see where I'm at here. Yes, I think right. What I excerpted here is some more discussion about the Russian Thread 3 documents. But again, you can watch all this online. And I was trying to keep this down to some manageable size. So here we go. George Knapp responding to Representative Tim Burchett.
I now recognize Mr. Burchett from Tennessee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Lady, and thank you, Ranking Member Crockett. I see a lot of friends out there, and I see a couple enemies, so I'll kind of remember that. But it's a pleasure being here. I want to remind people, too, this thing is an ongoing deal. We're not going to get this overnight. We've been fighting this battle, some of y'all, for 30 years and maybe longer. I hope we just keep focused on what we're trying to get to is total disclosure. We get a little wrapped up in a lot of things, but the government has something and they need to turn it over to us. We pay their dadgum salary. You pay our salary. You ought to get more out of us than you do. That's what disgusts me about this whole thing. I think they're just trying to run the clock out on us. Really, they'll poke us a little and they'll make jokes to us and try to pull us off the target. But I think we know where we're at. That's why they're firing at us, because we are over the target. My first question is, Mr. Knapp, I recently introduced the UAP Whistleblower Protection Act to help provide whistleblower protection to federal personnel for disclosing the use of federal taxpayer funds to investigate UFOs. I still don't want to say UAPs. How can Congress further increase whistleblower protections? I think you got to unleash the dogs and go track down the money and where it goes, because a lot of this stuff has been moved out of government. As you know, Rep. Burchett, it's been given to private contractors who stashed it away. They've had it for so long that there's nobody left inside government, or very few, who know where it is.
And they do that to keep us from FOIA, correct?
Yeah, it's to keep it from FOIA. And I think that the contractors who've had this stuff for a very long time set their own standards about who is allowed to know what. And it's a very small group that ever cracks that. I think Representative Luna has been looking at the use of classifications to hide things. I'm not sure that even this committee getting security clearances that should allow you to see this stuff would allow you to follow where it really goes.
I worry about the people that are looking at it and don't even know what they're looking at. I mean, it's gone through so many, since Roswell, for instance. I mean, you think there's nobody even alive that was around any of that stuff.
Yeah.
So,
I don't think they've made much progress from the people that I've talked to. I don't think they've made much progress in learning that technology. Might have made some, but you wonder, the implication is Tic Tac. Oh yeah, that's ours. What flew over Washington, D.C. in 52, is that ours too? When are you going to break that out? You guys authorize tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars on weapon systems that can't do half of what we've seen UFOs do. So when do they break this out? If it's really a classified project, could change the world. I don't think they've made much progress, and I think they've been lying to us and to you and the rest of the world, and they're still doing it.
yes, sir, I agree with you. I'm out of time, but real quick, who are the contractors that have this material? Corporations.
Well, one of them is Lockheed. And I'll tell you, I'm not saying Lockheed's the bad guys. They're doing what they were asked to do. Sure. They have lied about this because that's what they're supposed to do. But Lockheed would be one. There's a list I can give you, Congressman. Some of the big ones, the usual suspects.
Okay, thank you. Yield back, Chair Lady. Sorry for going over.
It's all good.
It's all George Knapp's fault.
It's all George Knapp's fault. Oh, Burchett, quite the comedian. Again, I don't necessarily agree with many of these Congress critters' policies or ideas, but he's always funny. His opening joke about seeing a lot of friends and a lot of enemies. I'm curious about that. But yes, okay. So and then of course the fact that he says he doesn't like to use the UAP acronym. He prefers UFO. Scores points in my book again. But yeah, what's it going to take? And Knapp says, got to unleash the dogs and track where the money goes. The part that I excise is basically Burchett saying, how did you get these Russian docs out of Russia? And he makes a joke about, I can't even transport honey over the state line or whatever. So, but again, we'll go back to this thing about the Lockheed having this legacy program, having that information. So right after this was Boebert asking each of the witnesses, asked Wiggins about his sighting, and Ducatelli and Borland and Spielberger about the whistleblower. Yeah, I really not worth playing any of her stuff. But here's another. After her is Representative Burleson again. I just excerpt a small part. He calls out Matthew Brown in the audience, sitting right there behind Knapp. Burleson specifically says that they've been blocked by someone in House administration staff in terms of their attempts to get more information. And this is where they play the Hellfire UAP intercept video that you've undoubtedly heard about by now. I am not going to focus on that other than to say it's probably not what we think it is. But it's intriguing. It's certainly worth looking at and thinking what you think it is. Burleson asks Knapp more about the Russian Thread 3 documents, and they also talk to Borland about NHI and BAE systems, and again, gotta be in a skiff, and Borland's like, I have to know if I'm allowed to tell you this information, and I have to know if you're allowed to hear that information. And then at the end, Burleson unfortunately starts talking about all the help he's gotten from Stephen Greer, leading to other whistleblower testimony like that of Michael Herrera, Roderick Castle, Randy Anderson, and Stephen Digna. But the part of this I want to play is one of Knapp's responses about James Lakatsky.
And you reported James Lakatsky came to you with government possession of NHI craft and how they ultimately gained entry. Can you testify to the veracity of that claim?
Dr. Lakatsky is an honorable man who served most of his career with the DIA, a very trusted, high-level rocket scientist and intelligence analyst who inspired the OSAP program, as I said earlier. And in full disclosure, I've co-written 2 books with him. He dropped this on myself and our other co-author out of the blue. And it took 14 months for us to get DOPSR approval for him to release 2 sentences on that. He said this craft, we had managed to get inside of it. It had no wings, no rotor, no tail. It had no fuel tanks. They didn't know how it flew or how it was operated. It looked like it was aerodynamic, but he would not go further. He's a by-the-book guy, and until he gets clearance to say more about that, I don't think we're going to hear much more. But it's not ours. It wasn't ours. We didn't make it. We didn't know who made it and how it was built and how it operated. We've got at least one, and I don't know. I think that's enough confirmation that we do have discs and materials.
Leslie.
All right. And next up was Representative Lee, who I believe is a Democrat from Georgia or Pennsylvania. I forget exactly, but she talks about the importance of not succumbing to sensational speculation, talks about the importance of whistleblowers. And she also, I will say, it was clear she was really using her time to target the current administration, not so overtly as has happened in past hearings where the Democrats really used this as an opportunity to take pot shots at the current administration. Not saying whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Take your time. Take your opportunities when you got them, right? Maybe. Lastly, though, she asks Spielberger about the importance of whistleblowers. To talk about that, he does. Next up was Representative Crane. I'm not going to show that clip. Knapp's response to why the secrecy actually was probably worthy of showing, but I didn't get the chance to make an excerpt of that. Then up after that were more from first from Representative Gill, then some more from Rep. Luna, then some more from Rep. Burleson. Luna asks Knapp about the Russian docs as possible disinfo. He talks about how he provided these to DIA, that would be Lakatsky, and Bass, that would be Bigelow, all part of the OSAP. given to Lukatsky and Bigelow. Burleson talks about the blocking of UAP efforts, the importance of the Schumer Amendment, saying how they don't normally agree on anything, but this is one thing they agree on. And Burleson interacts with Dylan Borland and the limitations of ARROW, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. And then right at the end, Representative Boebert asks Borland something after he made an allusion to, I think basically Borland had been asked by Burleson, basically the ARROW can't say that none of this means extraterrestrial intelligence or life. We're never going to be able to prove that until we can actually go to these planets. To which Boebert says,
Madam Chair, may I, just since we're on that topic real quick, how do we get to these other planets? How do we pass the Van Allen radiation belt safely?
Good question for you. I cannot answer that for you.
Madam Chair, may I, just since we're on that topic real quick, how do we get to these other planets? How do we pass the Van Allen radiation belt safely?
Good question for you. I cannot answer that for you.
I had to play that twice because it looks like George Knapp is snickering. I think Boebert has quite a reputation. She's talking about something that obviously a lot of folks, whether a lot of moon landing deniers focus on this idea of, well, our space program is fake because our astronauts would be fried by going through the Van Allen belts, this radiation belts. I, for a long time, have been one of those people going, well, what is the explanation for how we get through that? I've never heard an adequate answer. I probably just haven't done enough research. I am not endorsing her asking of that question. It just strikes me, and I think others, is like, WTF? Like, really? You're going to just throw that out there? Okay. I threw it out there because she threw it out there. Moving right along, this is a really quick clip. Well, actually, so what followed after that was Representative Perry asks each witness about their sightings. I just didn't find his interactions very noteworthy. Right after him was Representative Biggs, who pretty much did the same thing, asked each witness about their sightings. And then at the end of that, though, yes. Oh, so yeah, there's this little interesting bit at the end of Representative Biggs's questioning. Here we go.
It almost looks like ARROW operated as a counterintelligence operation to get people to come in, tell their stories, and then discredit all of them. I can't imagine that any whistleblower or witness will ever go to ARROW again because of what happened under the first director, who's now long gone, but still seems to act as the spokesperson for that organization.
And I would say, Madam Chair, maybe at some point we need to really dig deep into ARROW, and I would encourage us.
Well, I'd be happy to send maybe a subpoena to Mr. Kilpatrick.
Yeah.
Mr. Nucatelli. Mr. Nucatelli.
Right. Actually, powerful words from Knapp about the damage that ARROW's former director, Sean Kirkpatrick, has likely done to the ability of ARROW to get whistleblowers to testify. And yes, this idea that it almost seems like ARROW is a counterintelligence operation is rather telling. I go back to my opening comments an hour and a half ago at the beginning of this show, talking about the recent work of the ARROW doing this workshop with all these different organizations, the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, Society for UAP Studies, the SUAP, National UFO Historical Records Center, David Marler's organization, all these really good organizations, including RICE, Archives of the Impossible, and it being organized by a librarian. So, that scores points for me. I know ARROW, I have criticized ARROW a lot, but anyway, shortly after that, let's see, actually. Right. So then Representative Begich. Now, this is Nick Begich. There's been a lot of Nick Begiches in Congress and around that are noteworthy. That's more than I need to go into, but he asks Knapp about black budgets, asks if anybody can name gatekeepers within the root cell of the UAP SAP Federation. His words, I'm like, what? And a lot of his questions seemed very specifically worded, didn't elicit much response from the witnesses. However, Knapp did eventually say, in regard to name gatekeepers within the root cell of the UAP SAP Special Access Program Federation, Knapp said Dr. James Ryder at Lockheed. And then Biggs asked about, is there any security classification guide for UAP and NHI? Again, crickets, until Knapp finally says Glenn Gaffney at CIA. And there was another response, but that's most significant. And Knapp responds to the question of what is the long game, which actually is worth looking at, but I don't have that clip set up. Sorry. Trying to keep this short again. And then Biggs asks, org chart, is there an org chart or lines of control within the executive branch regarding these topics? Borland says that he will address this in a skiff, given the appropriateness of whether he's allowed to give this information or whether they're allowed to hear it. And then Representative Burleson, right at the end, asks a very interesting question that's really a follow-up to that clip we just played, where Biggs and Luna are talking about subpoenaing John Kirkpatrick.
Madam Chair, can I ask a parliamentary question of you?
Yeah, sure.
Does this subcommittee have the authority to do subpoenas?
Task force. So the task force, to answer that question, has to do it through full committee.
Okay.
So, and also in regards to immunity, which to Mr. Borland's point, we are going to be doing a motion to ask for immunity for you and a few other people to come into a skiff and tell us what you know without being subject to the Espionage Act, etc.
Thank you, ma'am.
So that's just kind of an update. But as a task force, because we're not a full subcommittee and there are certain authorities that haven't been granted to us, probably because they don't want us to have it. But there are ways to work around it. So we're kind of figuring that out.
And then Luna asks a question of Knapp about those Russia docs.
To Burleson, Burchett, do you have anything? Burchett and then Crane. Just real quick, Mr. Knapp, and short answers, please, because of time. How much of these alleged Russian crash retrieval documents have already been physically out there? So, I mean, percentage-wise of the documents that you submitted to Congress, what was public already and what was not newly?
Maybe 1%.
Okay, so the rest of it should be predominantly new information. Also, can you just elaborate real quick? I know you had, I think, mentioned a Thread 3 program, but also alleged in those documents, I got through maybe half of them there's a lot, and I don't speak Russian, contrary to what my people might allege. What does the Thread 3, was there any specific programs that existed within the Soviet government or groups to specifically investigate this by name?
It's a number. There's a number in those documents I gave you. There was a larger program that actually had 3 sub-programs. Thread 3 was the name I got, and then the DIA guys who looked at it figured out there was a much larger organization.
And it's listed in those documents?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Real quick, I'd like to ask the committee to...
All right, real quick, we're closing in here. After that little bit, Luna plays that video, this new video put out by Burleson of a alleged UAP, UFO orb or cylinder or something being hit by a Hellfire missile and seemingly not being affected by it, though there's lots of arguments to be made about whether that's true and accurate. They then get the witness reactions to this, seeing this footage from each of those witnesses. You can see that online. Then Crane asks more questions. He basically asks Wiggins about his experience. Crane apparently served on the ship as well and commiserates with them. Then Burleson asks some more questions. They ask Wiggins about whether object was underwater. Wiggins basically says that he really couldn't tell, that it's really hard to make that determination from the distance and the type of optics that they were looking through. He then asks Knapp about nuclear missiles in Russia, and they relate this famous incident apparently where, just like here in the United States, UFOs appeared and affected the launch codes, but in the Russian case, they activated them and seemingly made these missiles ready to launch, allegedly. Then up was Representative Ogles, who asks, what one piece of evidence would you point the American public towards to start their journey on this topic? Nisatelli says, start with this hearing, start with this newest video. Wiggins says, the entirety of mass media about this. And Ogles says, the totality of the evidence. And yes, they agree. Knapp says, the paper trail, FOIA, like what got me into this. Borland says, Bob Lazar, but not because of what you might think, because of how he was discredited and his being out in the desert videotaping UFOs near Area 51. So he knew something was going on. I'm not sure about that, but obviously Lazar would resonate with Dylan Borland. Then Burchett asks some more questions, and he is just ever the joker. He is ever the joker.
I'd like to go back now on our lightning round of questioning to Representative Burchett and then Burleson. Burchett always number one.
That's what I should be. Number 1 in your heart, number 435 on the chart. That's me.
Okay. So, yeah, basically he asks Nisatelli about nuclear missile story, the Russian story. But it's more just like, hey, doesn't this worry you? Burleson. Oh, yeah, this is Burchett goes, and Burleson goes. Burleson also calls out Danny Sheehan in the audience, as well as Jaime Maussan in the audience, which is not like, I'm like, okay, Danny Sheehan, sure. Jaime Maussan, no, absolutely not. Do not be giving that man any support. And then lastly are the 3.5 minutes of closing statements that we'll round this out with.
I would now like to yield 30 minutes to Representative Crockett.
I'll reserve.
Thank you. In closing, I want to thank our witnesses once again for their testimony today. I now yield to Ranking Member Crockett for closing remarks.
I'll pass. No, I just want to say thank you so much to each and every one of you for being here today, for staying committed to this, and for your courage. I truly believe that courage is contagious. And right now, we need more courage than ever, whether it's UAPs or whether we're dealing with any other form of government where people are afraid to come out and speak their truth. The American people are relying on amazing public servants like you to speak up on their behalf, to be the watchdog, and to make sure that we are as safe as possible. And so thank you so much again for conducting a bipartisan hearing on such an important matter.
Thank you. I'd now like to recognize myself for some closing remarks. This is obviously something that doesn't just affect everyone in this room. I can tell you that specifically for where I represent in Pinellas County, Tampa Bay, and Florida as a whole, there's many sightings and many questions, people reporting this, but I'm not the only one. I was also told by Representative Biggs, as well as our great representative from Alaska, that these are not isolated instances. And so it does give us reasoning to provide investigative inquiry into these topics, but also I would also like Mr. Spielberger, if you could actually review and see if your organization would endorse the Whistleblower Protection Act that Representative Burchett has. I can tell you that I will be signing on to a letter, as well as I'm sure many other members of this task force, and we hope that the ranking chairwoman or my colleague here, Representative Crockett, as well as our Democrats that were here today, consider also signing on to that, as we do feel that it is time to ensure that our whistleblowers are given adequate protections and that people like Mr. Borland are not facing retribution in the way that they have been. With that being said, with all that and without objection, all members have 5 legislative days within to submit materials and additional written questions for the witnesses, and which will be also forwarded to those witnesses. If there are no further business, without objection, I'd like to now recognize Representative Burchett for a closing remark.
I would just like to thank the ranking member and the chair lady for their courage. This is a tough issue. We all catch hell for it. And it's gratifying that we're hearing a bipartisan nature and the way this meeting was conducted. And I want to thank y'all for your courage. Thank y'all. And
without objection, the task force stands adjourned.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. That's going to be it. You can, of course, go to our website, anomalyarchives.org, and there are pages there for this task force hearing and all the other hearings and so much more. We've got, I think it's about 1,000 pages there at anomalyarchives.org, and you can go to our patreon.com/anomalyarchives. We'll have links to all the different stuff we didn't discuss this show in the show notes at the website. So thank you and good night.